Well, as we mentioned earlier, international leaders are in Paris tonight to discuss Libya's future. Europe correspondent Emma Alberici is there and she joins us live from the French capital. Emma, enormous challenges ahead, obviously, for Libya. What's this conference going to focus on?
Well, to put it bluntly, most of the leaders here have said they don't want a repeat of Iraq. They've said that very plainly, insofar as they don't want to see a power vacuum be filled by rival gangs and tribes that descend the country into a worse kind of military chaos than it was before the Allies went in. So this is all about making the transition to a viable democracy with all the functioning institutions that would entail. Everything from making the banks run smoothly and have cash flowing through them to having a workable police force. They've already asked the National Transitional Council for help in training the police force because up until now, for the last 42 years, they've been run by a totalitarian regime with a very centralised authority and no real discipline around the way they operate. Similarly, hospitals need to be rebuilt. The whole phase of reconstruction, ostensibly this conference is called the reconstruction of Libya, but that takes so many different forms, politically as well as socially.
It's said the conference is actually going to be rather short, so is it in fact a symbolic effort to show the world that there is a viable new Libyan leadership?
Well, there must be a bit of that because, of course, as you rightly mentioned, it only goes for 3 hours. It's hardly conceivable that they would solve all the ills of this now chaotic country in such a short period of time. But, of course, what they want to do here is lay the seeds of some kind of viable administration supported by the West. Curiously, though, the National Transitional Council doesn't want too much interference from the allies who've taken part in this campaign, but the cynic might say another part of the motivation behind this Paris conference is to lock in positions for ongoing future contracts, whether that be to look after the oil rigs or to train the police, in fact, or to do the actual structural reconstruction on the ground, building firms and so on. So they're jockeying for positions. Some of the commentators today have said that in fact President Nicolas Sarkozy and David Cameron are like rival tribes vying for the right to call themselves the chief sponsors of this new regime because they want to be there at the ground floor to pick up all those contracts and perhaps be there to guide the country through and be able to reign triumphant at the end, especially locally from a political perspective when Nicolas Sarkozy is facing elections in around 8 months' time. This is also feeding into the domestic politics of France.
Very briefly, Colonel Gaddafi is still at large. NATO remains on a war footing. It's going to stay that way, I think, until Gaddafi is captured and the situation is stabilised. What does the National Council want?
Well, the National Transitional Council, in a word, wants money, and we know that there is something in the order of $200 billion worth of frozen Gaddafi regime funds splattered around the world in bank accounts, tied up in property and elsewhere, and the move is on now to have those funds released. It's not very simple, though, because, of course, it's not in any one person's name, it's in the Gaddafi name. How they actually change that into either government names or the names of the National Transitional Council is something they're also trying to nut out here today. But money is the central objective for the National Transitional Council here. Without that, they say, of course, they can't pay the salaries of public servants. They can't start to begin the process towards a well-functioning democracy.
Emma Alberici, we'll have to leave you there. We thank you very much for joining us tonight.